Hello everyone and welcome. Today's video is going to be about upgrading the firmware in the Naza M controller from DJI. This controller is built into many of the Phantoms, and this week DJI released software version 2.18, which includes a firmware version 4. Before we get into that though, I'm just going to quickly highlight what we're going to cover off in this video. Firstly, we're going to cover downloading and installing the software assistant, and that will show you how to get the version 4 of the firmware. We're going to cover what's new. There are some interesting new features in the firmware, and I'll cover those in that section. We're going to show you how to actually upgrade the actual firmware in your Phantom. We're going to show you how to calibrate your transmitter, which is recommended after a firmware upgrade. Then we're going to show you how to calibrate your compass. Again, this is recommended after a firmware upgrade. We're also going to show you how to do an advanced IMU calibration. Now, quite often people have issues after firmware upgrades where your Phantom doesn't fly straight or fly level. Quite often you'll need to just calibrate the IMU. We'll cover that off a bit later. And finally, I'm going to cover off a little bit about gain settings, what they are and why they're important. Okay. Okay, to download the software, what we need to do is just first open Google. If you just Google DJI, the first thing that comes up actually is a link for the Phantom. If you click on that link, it takes you straight to DJI's website. What you need to do here is click on Support and Download. And over here on the left, click on Downloads. And we're going to need a few files from this page. What I'm going to download is I'm going to download the release notes, because there's a few features in there I want to talk about in a second. So I'll just save that to my desktop. I'm just going to download the current version of the assistant software, which is 2.18. And I'm going to download the default configuration parameters. Again, this is very important, so I'm just going to download that as well. Okay, I've downloaded all of those. I'm just going to quickly unzip the configuration file, and I'm just going to quickly unzip the installer for the Naza software. I'll just delete those zips quickly. If I run the installer, it just quickly walks me through installing the software. Just keep clicking next and everything, and it will install. Now, I'm not going to run the software yet. I'm going to go through a couple of things first. I'll just delete the installer. If I click on my Start menu, click on All Programs, click on DJI, you'll see that I've actually got two versions of the assistant installed now. 2.16 is for firmware 3.16. 2.18 is for firmware version 4, and I'm going to keep those there just in case I ever need to revert back to the older firmware. So it's perfectly okay to have both on your machine. That's not going to be a problem whatsoever, but the software assistants are tied to a specific version of the firmware, so you might want to just keep any older versions you've got. I'm not going to cover off installing the drivers in this video because I've done that in previous videos, so we're just going to carry on and look at what's new now. Okay, well, one of the files we've just downloaded are the release notes for the current version of the firmware. So if we just open up those, you can see that the current version of the firmware is version 4. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about what's new in the firmware, because there's some really great additions to the firmware which are really interesting to see. The first is the addition of a ground station function. Now you can connect to a laptop or PC or to an iPad using a Bluetooth data link, so you'll need the Bluetooth module in your Phantom, and you can program 16 waypoints, so your Phantom can automatically be programmed to fly around 16 waypoints. So that's an absolutely brilliant feature. The next feature, and this is causing a lot of controversy on the forums, is the DJI have added flight limits. Now you might think, why do I want flight limits in my Phantom? Well, this is an effort to combat flyaways. you can actually configure the maximum height and the maximum radius your Phantom will fly. If it exceeds that radius, you will lose control of the Phantom. The idea being that it will recover back to within that radius by itself, and then you will be able to regain control. At the moment, this is a bit controversial because a lot of people are reporting that they're having issues regaining control once they've come back into the radius. This might be that they need to set up some sort of hysteresis or overlap on the actual radius, or it might be that people are just struggling with the actual process. I haven't tested this, but that's next on my list of things to do, so I'll be going out and testing that feature. In the UK, the guidance for flying RC aircraft is you're allowed to go to a maximum height. Well, it's recommended that you stay below a maximum height of 400 feet, so that's about 133 meters, and you stay within a maximum radius of 1500 feet, which is about 500 meters. So if you weren't sure, you could program those flight limits into your Phantom, and then you'd be certain that you're always within the CAA guidance on flight restrictions. The next feature, and this has probably been requested by quite a lot of people, is there's actually a motor test feature been built into the software now, so you can test all of your motors to make sure they're all working okay. There are also some other optimizations, taking off conditions from moving vehicles, and how to enter compass calibration more easily, but we'll cover the compass calibration off a bit later. What I will do is just scroll down to the bottom of this first page, because I want to read out the important notes at the bottom. When you program the firmware in your Phantom, you absolutely need to load the default parameters file. If you do not, your gain values will be wrong, your transmitter and receivers will be set up wrong, a lot of the functions will be disabled. So when I read on the forums that people are having problems connecting to their Phantoms after they've upgraded the firmware, and then you tell them that they've got the wrong transmitter receiver combination set up, and they say, oh yeah, that's right, that is also telling me that they haven't downloaded the default file, and they've also not got all of their parameters set. So quite often I get a bit frustrated when I read on the forums a lot of people are having flyaways when they haven't followed the instructions on upgrading their firmware. I'm not saying that's the case for everybody, but it seems to certainly be quite common, but we'll cover that off a bit later. The next one is for Phantom users after upgrading the firmware. Oh, well, let's just cover off what I've said. Please download the default configuration file and then recalibrate your transmitter. If users degrade the firmware from version 4, please make sure you reset the default parameters from other versions. So if you're gonna, before you upgrade, it might be worthwhile just making sure you've downloaded the older software assistant, the older parameters file, and you've still got them. Just in case you need to revert back. They are specific to each version of the software, so you just might want to make sure you've got those before we carry on. Right, now what we're going to do next is we're going to run the assistant software. I haven't practiced on this, so I'm just going to run it. This is my first time running it, and I'll walk you through exactly what all the messages and stuff are when they pop up. So we're actually going to program the actual firmware in our Phantoms now. So if you double click on the assistant software, you get the splash screen come up. If you just click on skip, you get the software pop up. Now straight away there's a message saying that version 4 firmware has been announced, and you should download the latest assistant software. Well, we've already done that, so I'm just going to click close on that there. I'm now going to click on upgrade, and I'm going to actually connect my Phantom. I'm going to connect the USB cable first into my PC. Then I'm going to connect my battery. Now before I connect my battery, I just want to point out that I have taken off all my props, so can you please not do this with any props attached. It's just a safety concern. If the firmware goes wrong, you don't want your props flying around and not being able to control them, so please take your props off before you do anything. Okay, I'm just going to connect the battery now. Okay, straight away you'll see that the firmware upgrade screen's popped up. The main controller has current version of 3.16, available is version 4. Download is it's already downloaded it for me. I just need to click upgrade, and it says, do you really want to upgrade? Before you select the yes, please disconnect the power to all motors and remove all propellers. So I've already done that. Okay, now it's flashing the firmware in my Phantom. And now it says to power down the device and repower it. Okay, I'm glad that little message has popped up in the corner there. What's happened now is, because we've upgraded our firmware, all of the calibration is now out. So the compass error message has popped up, and what we're going to need to do is run load, first of all, before we continue, actually, we're going to load the default configuration file, which is going to reset all our gain settings, and then we're going to go through a compass calibration, and then I'll run through the other calibrations. If we don't reconfigure the parameters, I'll show you a couple of things that will be wrong. If you click on Basic, RC, what happens is these settings don't get set right. Mine I've already set to ppm, so that's absolutely fine. But what I'm going to do is quickly go to Tools, Import Parameters, click on the file, click Open, and that's it. It's now loaded all of the parameters for the Phantom. I'm just going to unplug it again. Just going to plug it back in. Straight away I've got the GPS error again. And I'll go on to the next section in calibrating your GPS. But that has now loaded. If I quickly click on View, you see all of these gain settings. They are gain settings that have been optimized for this version of the firmware. I'm going to go into those a bit later and explain what they are and why they're important. Okay, I'm going to try and cover this as best as I can, guys, because it's a little bit fiddly to do, because I haven't got any brackets for my GoPro. Okay, we need the CL switch in the off position, we need the GPS up. What we then need to do is hold up both switches. This is a bit fiddly. You need to switch on the power, and you'll hear that noise. You need to then drop the CL switch down one, and then you need to lower the two throttles, and you need to drop the ATT switch to the bottom. And what you can now do is calibrate all of your range of motion. Flick the home lock, and that's it. Calibrated the transmitter. Okay guys, well I've just come outside to calibrate the compass in my Phantom. I'm just going to switch on my transmitter, and what I'm going to do is connect my battery. Pop the lid shut. What I'm then going to do is flick the, if you look at the light, it's just flashing. I'm going to flick the ATT GPS. You should get a yellow constant light. So what I'm going to do, pick the Phantom up, just turn around with it. Goes green. I'm going to put it nose down, turn around with it again. That's it, starts flashing. And that's it now, trying to pick up the GPS. So I'm going to put it back on GPS mode. It's picked up all the satellites. Ready to go.
Okay, that's now got home lock. I should be able good to fly, no problems whatsoever.
Hi there. Right, I just took my Phantom outside to calibrate the compass because I get a lot of I don't seem to pick up satellites indoors, so I'm just going to plug it back into my PC now. That's it. It's connected into my software, and as you can see, the actual error message has gone away. What's happened though during the compass error is if I click on Advanced IOC. What's happened during the calibration is when it lost the compass lock, the IOC got switched off. You just need to switch this back on. If you don't do that, then you won't have any IOC when you go back to fly your Phantom. At the moment you can see the switch is set to the off position, and I can flick the switch on my transmitter and it goes through all of the different options. So I know that my actual IOC is now back on. Okay guys, well, we've calibrated our transmitter, we've calibrated our compass. What we're going to do now is calibrate the IMU. Now the IMU is the inertial measurement unit. Basically it's the thing that's got all the sensors on it that keeps your Phantom level. So it's dealing with the gyroscopes and the accelerometers, and it makes sure your Phantom flies properly. If you don't have this calibrated, sometimes you'll get your Phantom won't lift off properly, it'll be drooping at one side, it'll do all sorts of weird stuff when it's flying. Quite often the software will tell you that it doesn't need calibrating, but you should always calibrate it regardless after you do a firmware update. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on Tools, if we click Check IMU Status just to show you, it says there's no need for a calibration, but we're going to ignore that. If you click on Advanced, click on Advanced Cali. Now this basically says it's going to take 5 to 10 minutes for the calibration to occur. Mine in past firmwares has taken 10 seconds, and then it seems to be absolutely perfect. What you also get sometimes is an error message here about the MC being over temperature. You can switch your Phantom off, leave it for 10-20 minutes, switch it back on again and try again. Or if you're impatient like me, I just keep clicking retry and eventually it calibrates. But we'll click yes and see what happens for you now. Okay, it says keep the main controller stationary. It will not need to fly, and if it will not fly well and need to redo calibration. So we're just going to leave everything sat on my desk. Okay, calibration is started. Just have to sit here for a minute. Okay, that's it. That's the advanced calibration done. The last thing I'm going to talk about a little bit before we actually go out and fly are the gain settings. But just to let you know, you should pretty much be good to go now. You've calibrated the compass, you've calibrated your transmitter, and you've calibrated the IMU. Hi there, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the gain settings. Now if you load up your Naza software assistant, click on the View tab, your gain settings are here. Now these are the default values that are loaded when you load the configuration file. So these are what's set by DJI. Basically these settings affect the amount of power that goes to each of the motors, and they can affect the performance of your quadcopter. Now these are set here for a basic out-of-the-box quadcopter weighing 800 grams. You think, okay, well why might I want to change some of the gain settings? Well, if you start adding things like cameras, gimbals, FPV systems to your quadcopter, you're going to make it much heavier. I've regularly seen people on the forums reporting 1200 grams, 1300 grams. That's 50+% extra weight that your Phantom's lifted. What you need to do is adjust these gain settings to make sure your Phantom's got enough power. Imagine if you suddenly increased the weight of your car by 50%. How underpowered would your car be? It would probably struggle quite a lot. So whenever you're increasing the load on your Phantom, then you probably should be increasing the gain. Things like extra batteries, if you want to put 2 batteries on there, you'll probably want to increase the gain. Increasing the gain will have the effect though of using more power and shorten your battery life, but if you're going to be lifting 50% more weight, then that's to be expected. Okay, so how do you get a ballpark for what these values should be? I mean, you could just go trial and error and just keep plugging in values to see what happens and see how well your Phantom works. Well, if you go into the actual Naza M quick start guide, there are actually settings in here for different quadcopters. So they've got the F330, the 450 and the 550. They've got their weights and the actual gains that they've got set for them. So this is a reasonable rule of sort of guide on what sort of settings you should be plugging in. Again, you might find that some settings work better for you than others, and it's just going to need to be something you're going to need to try. I'm running a GoPro on my Phantom, so it's running a little bit. It's got an extra 100 grams on it, so it's going to be about the 890-900 grams weight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my parameters to match that of the 450 because it's the same weight. If I was going up, say, to 1300 grams, I might go somewhere in between the 450 and the 550. So all I need to do for that, I load up the software, and I'll just move it down so I can see the parameters. So basic pitch, I'm going to change that to 150. Basic roll, just going to change that to 150. Yaw I'm going to leave on 100. Vertical I'm going to leave on 100. No, I'm actually going to increase that a little bit. If you find that your machine is sluggish taking off, that's the one you want to increase. Attitude gain we're going to put on 150, and roll we're going to put on 150. Okay, and that's it. As I said, gain controls the amount of power that goes to your quadcopter, and you're quite okay to come in and tweak some of these settings. You'll find that with extra weight, you might find that with the stock settings, your quadcopter sort of lifts quite slowly. However, just be aware that with the extra weight, when you're coming down, they come down quick. So if you've got a big camera on there, gimbal and stuff like that, just be careful when you come into land because they will drop like a rock. So just be careful. And that's it. That's the gain settings. If you've got any questions, just leave me some feedback on YouTube and I'll get back to you. Thanks. Bye.